This is Syd Field's Screenplay, the first of what is now countless books, publications, seminars, how-to videos, you name it, on writing for film and television. With millions of copies sold in 23 languages, Screenplay is considered the prototype for modern screencraft, with Syd himself venerated as the world's first script guru. However, at the heart of this book lies a critical error that has bungled the way we think, talk, and go about creating movie stories for over 40 years. An error that continues to confuse and frustrate would-be screenwriters to this day. This is Field's Blunder. Hello, I am the Script Monk. Welcome to my first video on movie storycraft, screenwriting, and narrative theory. And I could think of no simpler place to begin than with the father of modern screencraft, Syd Field. Syd was born in 1935 in Hollywood, California. With a life that was always movie industry adjacent, Syd eventually began his true path in the same place that I did, as a script reader for a minor production company. Tasked with grinding through hundreds of unproduced screenplays in hopes of finding something good enough to make into an actual feature film, Syd soon learned what all readers learn. 99% of all scripts aren't worth recommending. In fact, the vast majority are god-awful. And let me tell you, reading bad screenplays is torture. I mean, there's plenty of times when I just wanted to lower my head and ramp through the drywall. This naturally made Syd wonder what made a good script good. I mean, what did that one script have out of 100 that the other 99 lacked? So, in the spirit of Aristotle, Syd set about studying the best films of his time to uncover the hidden rules of good storytelling. And the result was this: the three-act paradigm, or simply the paradigm. The three-act paradigm is quite simple. It asserts that successful movies unfold in three distinct sections, or three acts. In the first act, the setup, the situation is established and the drama is set into motion by giving the main character a desire or goal. In the second act, the confrontation, the main character deals with challenges and obstacles in the way of that desire or goal. And in the third act, the resolution, the drama is brought to an end, ultimately answering whether or not the character will indeed achieve their goal. Now, of course, the idea of a story told with a beginning, middle, and end was nothing new, nor was Syd the first person to write a manual on screenwriting. However, what made Syd's work remarkable was the recognition of a certain geometry to the stories that best held the audience's interest throughout the length of a 2-hour movie. See, the three acts are laid out in a neat 30-60-30 ratio, meaning that in a typical 120-minute film, the setup amounts to the opening 30 minutes, the confrontation covers the following 60 minutes, and the resolution takes up the remaining half hour. Syd found that virtually every successful Hollywood movie conformed to this geometry, give or take. Thus, there existed a standardized movie structure. Furthermore, Syd noticed that the end of each act and the beginning of the next was always clearly marked by major story events that Syd called plot points. In Syd's words, a plot point is an incident or event that hooks into the story and spins it around into another direction. The first of such events always occurred at around the 30-minute mark, and the second at roughly 90 minutes. Now, as the first book of its kind, Syd's terms and definitions often leave a lot to be desired. What he calls plot points are better retermed as end-of-act turning points, as they create events which literally turns the focus of the story in an entirely new direction. A plot point is really anything which changes the story situation, and there are literally dozens of plot points in any given film. But I digress. In any case, the idea of a universal movie structure took Hollywood by storm, and by the mid-90s, the three-act structure had been fully accepted as the official Hollywood paradigm. In other words, Syd's model had become the structure by which industry professionals assumed all good stories must be told. Now, the credit for this revolution belongs not just to Syd Field, but to the dozens of subsequent authors and teachers who took Syd's original model and duplicated it in their own work. Authors like Linda Seeger, David Howard and Edward Mabley, Lou Hunter, Robert McKee, Robert Berman, William Miller, Linda Palmer, Jennifer Lurch, Linda Cowgill, Jonathan Dawson, Linda Arison, Michael Chase Walker, Ray Frensham, Laura Shellhart, Robert Pollock, Kate Wright, Mark Axelrod, Blake Snyder, David Howard, Alexis Nicky, Madeline DiMaggio, J.T. Clark, and on and on and on, carving Syd's paradigm into stone as inarguable law. See, one of the big problems with screenwriting manuals is the nasty habit of simply repeating what the last person said without putting any thought into whether it is actually true or accurate. And in the case of Syd's three-act structure, this has resulted in a big problem for anyone who wants to learn how to write a professional quality screenplay. Because within Syd's original paradigm lies a fundamental oversight that was simply repeated ad nauseum by all the other writers. You see, Hollywood's beloved three-act structure has a dirty little secret. You might notice this problem yourself if we simply take Syd's original diagram and make it look a little different, like this. If you've ever played with building blocks, you might look at this diagram and wonder, why is it so lopsided? Why is there one short act, one long act, and then another short act? I mean, no kid would stack the blocks this way. And if you're trying to write a screenplay yourself, you might have a pretty good idea of how you want the story to start and maybe how it should end. But what goes in this long middle? I mean, Syd called this second act the confrontation, but how are you going to make that fit a full hour of screen time? I mean, if you've read a lot of amateur screenplays like I have, you'll know that this is where most scripts fall apart. They become dull, become repetitive, they lose momentum, they lose focus, they go off on tangents just to fill out all this time. Now, Syd stressed the importance of the end of act turning points. Each of these events gives the story a big push of focus and momentum to send it into the next act. In Star Wars, for instance, Act 2 begins with Luke going off with Obi-Wan to get the stolen plans to the Rebels. Act 3 begins with the Rebels launching their attack on the Death Star. Both of these events lay a clear path as to what should occur in the following sequences. But the problem is, these turning points only give so much of a push. Usually the momentum runs out in less than 30 minutes, meaning that the big event which ends Act 1 only gives enough of a push to get us halfway through Act 2, leaving the story like a car trying to cross the desert on only half a tank of gas. And that's when most amateur scripts die. But if we look at any good movie, you'll notice that professional screenplays don't have this problem. They not only maintain focus and momentum, but the drama actually escalates as the story moves to the second act. So what are the professionals being told that amateurs aren't? Well, here's 3-act structure's dirty little secret. It's completely misnamed. If you look at any successful movie story and pay attention to that 60-minute middle, you'll notice that the focus of the action in the first half is always completely different from the focus of the action in the second half. In Star Wars, the first half is all about getting off Tatooine to the rebel allies in Alderaan. The second half is all about escaping the Death Star. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first half is all about Indy searching for the Ark's location. The second half is all about Indy trying to steal the Ark back from the Nazis. In Titanic, the first half is all about Rose and Jack trying to continue their love affair. The second half is about the pair trying to escape the sinking ship. Not only does the focus of the action change between the first and second halves, but this change is always effectuated by yet another previously unrecognized turning point, situated smack dab in the middle of the story. The heroes are captured by the Death Star, the Nazis steal the Ark, the ship hits an iceberg. This event, called the midpoint, typically takes the form of a crisis, which forces the characters to suddenly stop their current course of action and turn in a drastically new direction. We're trying to get to Alderaan, oh crap, we gotta get off the Death Star. I'm searching for the Ark, oh crap, I gotta get the Ark back. We're trying to fulfill our love, oh crap, we gotta get off this ship. See, the real movie act structure doesn't look like this. It looks like this. There isn't 3 acts, but 4 acts of equal length. I mean, doesn't that look better? Isn't that more balanced? Now you might be asking, so what? What's the difference if we think of it as 3 acts or 4 acts? Well, aside from keeping stories from dying halfway through a script, and aside from providing writers with a way to keep building drama and excitement from beginning to end, knowing the difference between Act 2A and Act 2B is essential if you want to understand how the story's plot arc interacts with its character arc. To put things simply, the plot arc is all about external change, the things that physically happen to change the character's physical situation. The character arc deals with internal change. It is the course of psychological transformation undergone by the character over the course of the story. The person they are at the start of the story is never the same person as who they are at the end. See, what we call a movie story isn't just made up of plot alone. The story is made up of the interaction between the plot and the character arcs, and the basic structure of this interaction remains unclear until we realize that a story is told in 4 acts instead of 3. In a nutshell, the character begins the story with certain qualities, attitudes, or behaviors that are in some way inadequate or inappropriate for the adventure they will soon go on, the problem they will soon face, or the role they must fulfill. In Act 1, we set up these traits, along with a dramatic situation. Act 1 then ends with some kind of event which forces the character to fully commit to the adventure ahead. In Act 2A, the character takes action in pursuit of their goal, but they do so using their inadequate or inappropriate methods. As a result, the situation somehow worsens. In other words, in Act 2A, the character unwittingly digs themselves into a hole. At the midpoint, the character encounters a crisis event. This crisis causes the character to reevaluate their actions thus far and choose whether to adopt new, different attitudes or behaviors in response to the worsened situation. Act 2B then sees the character responding to the crisis by taking a new course of action in the effort to climb out of the hole. And if this Act 2B struggle has caused positive change in the character, that is, makes them better suited for the challenges they face, the character enters Act 3 ready to overcome all final obstacles and bring the story to its resolution. So to repeat, in Act 2A, the character digs himself into a hole. The midpoint crisis makes them realize they are in a hole. In Act 2B, they try to climb out of that hole. That's the big difference. Now, to Syd Field's credit, he did eventually recognize his blunder and tried to correct it. Kinda? 5 years after Screenplay, Syd published the Screenwriter's Workbook. Workbook is mostly a repeat of the material in Screenplay, except for a new section titled The New Paradigm! Here, Syd tells a long story about how he finally realized there was another major plot point midway through a film, an event that effectively split the long Act 2 into two distinct halves. But Syd failed to go so far as to recognize the two halves as two separate acts, and thus correct his original numbering scheme. So essentially, the new paradigm is just the same old diagram, now with a dotted line to represent the midpoint. As for what the midpoint specifically does, and what should exactly happen in the now divided first and second halves of the second act, Syd basically leaves it to his readers to figure it out. No, seriously, that's pretty much exactly what he says. In any case, this edition was too little too late, as the train had already left the station and 3-act structure was already on its way to becoming indisputable Hollywood law. The end result of all this? Well, even if a writer does know that stories are structured with 4 acts, they still have to call this the 3-act structure. That's what it's called. It's too late to change it. Notice how I've been saying Act 2A and Act 2B instead of renumbering the acts 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is because, thanks to Field's blunder, a story's final act shall forever be called Act 3, even though it's the 4th act in succession. Likewise, whenever someone mentions the second act, they are referring to Acts 2A and 2B in combination. Hence, confusion! Now, just to be clear, nothing I've said is meant to disparage Syd Field or his contribution to screencraft. As the first of his generation, Syd possessed remarkable insight and introduced many concepts absolutely fundamental to cinematic storytelling. In fact, other than misidentifying the number of acts, Syd doesn't get really anything wrong in Screenplay. He just tends to be a bit oversimplistic. So, would I still recommend reading Screenplay? Well, if you're a total newcomer to screenwriting, I'd say absolutely. In fact, Syd's oversimplistic approach might be best for newbies who are afraid to be overwhelmed by too much technical detail. But just keep in mind that you're still dealing with what is essentially a kindergarten level of screencraft knowledge, and you should move on to something more advanced if you really want to understand how cinematic stories function. If you want to learn more about 3-act structure or movie storytelling in general, I recommend you pick up a copy of my book, Screenwriting Down the Atoms, which is currently celebrating its 10-year anniversary. I wrote this over a decade ago to make up for what I saw as the shortcomings in all other screenwriting manuals, and I still believe it stands above the rest. And like I said, this is the first video of my channel, so if you are interested in more about movie storycraft, screenwriting, and narrative theory, please subscribe for future videos, because let me tell you, in the future, I plan on digging into some deep stuff. But that's it for now. I'm the Script Monk. Thank you for watching.